Welcome to the Penguin Magic Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Tate. Joining me, as always, my good buddy, Nick Lacapo. Nick, you and Archie hanging out this morning?
Yeah, he heard Derren Brown was on today's podcast. I had to give him the sad news. Derren Brown won't be joining us right now, but in a little bit, he'll be on. So.
Is Archie a big Derren Brown fan?
Huge, massive, like the biggest.
Well, let's talk about some things that have come out and sort of the state of the Penguin that we usually do, and then we'll get into Derren Brown a little bit before the main event. But some cool stuff has come out. I know we've talked about Rattle Dice a little bit, but
well, they're out now, and I you know what? I knew that it would be super popular among everybody. It's one of those that once any magician that I know sees the method behind it, they just freak out. And so it's I should have grabbed it. I had it. Where is it? No, it's in the other room. It's in the other pile of magic on the other side of this building.
Mine's down on my coffee table. I've been playing with them so I'm like watching Star Wars again. I'm watching the entire Skywalker saga, and I've just been and I know I have to get good with Rattle Dice before Magic Live, because people are going to be coming up to the booth and being like, hey, can I see this? Can I see that? And so I've just been like messing around with them, figuring out how to like secretly turn them on and off. And I think that like, for me, one of the interesting things, and there's a demo I want to do for Rattle Dice that is going to sound insane, but the noise comes from where it's supposed to, which is like, that's crazy, right? With like a sonic or like a sound based gimmick. Like that hasn't happened before, has it?
No. Well, like, I can tell you this,
but
the feedback that I've gotten so far, and if you're not aware, this is a set of dice that you can get, a special set of dice that act like regular dice, except one of the die, if you were to shake it in your hand, it sounds like two.
Yeah.
Now, traditionally, to accomplish stuff like this, like other methods that have been published, or at least on the Magic Marketplace, involves some sort of like device that you'd hide like under your sleeve or something that will make noise when you shake your arm, which is what I was kind of not surprised that I got so many messages about this, that like people saying, what are the clothing restrictions with Rattle Dice? It didn't even dawn on me to really talk about that in the pitch, because I just thought it was so obviously not that.
Aren't you performing it in a t-shirt at some point?
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing's in t-shirts, but and like you cleanly like show a die in your hand, shake it, and you show two. Anyway, it's great. It's just such a cool gimmick. Like I can't be any more clear. The die itself sounds like two when you shake it. It's got something in it. Makes it sound like two, which is very cool.
And then the fact that you can turn the rattle feature on and off is really neat too.
Yeah, I'm not sure the practicality, like what the exact use case is for it. It's wild that you can, and it also allows you to clean up a whole lot easier as well.
And you can, because of the qualities involved here, you can do stuff like you can use like a table to hold it out. So like you can introduce it into play, which is, I know that you teach, I think it's you or Gregory Wilson, who teaches like some dice through table stuff.
Yeah, dice. He's got a great die through table routine that like starts using the table as a holdout. So it's just a really, you begin and end with clean dice, which is it's very smart routining.
It's I'm like super stoked to see what the community does with this, because I know that there's like a lot of like cool ideas on the tutorial, but it's definitely one of those things. It's like, it reminds me a little bit of Black Door, where you're like, oh, that's really cool. And then to see where people take it is going to be really fun.
Everybody's got their own things that they've been doing for a decade that involve like a chop cup or two objects in the pocket, one in the hand, or what, this is going to slot in with some sort of routine structure that you've learned throughout your time in Magic. No doubt, you'll instantly know something to do with it.
Yeah.
But it's also just, man, is it a fun little gimmick to
Yeah.
have laying around.
Oh yeah.
And I cannot stress how much the sound sounds like two dice
I
or
think
three dice or
that
four. It
to me
really,
is is like that's what's so crazy is the sound comes from where it should and it sounds really good.
mm. There's also the illusion of like just having one die in your hand and shaking it, like
Mm-hmm.
keeping your fingers loosely open. It still looks like you have two because you hear two. And even though you can only see one, your brain kind of sees two.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you don't have to be like, it's a
Yeah.
crazy gimmick. It's great. It's a really good gimmick.
Then also coming out this week is Picturesque by John Gustafaro and David Regal, which is this is interesting because it's kind of a re-release. They put it out on their own, and then we were working with them to put it out again. And the like big changes here are like studio quality tutorial with John and David, studio quality performances, but now you're getting two complete sets of the Picturesque gaffs, as well as a complete set of the original McDonald's Aces gaffs, and there's a cheat sheet card that comes with it that shows you the setups. So
Oh yeah.
because you get three routines with it. One is like John's incredible Picturesque routine, which is just like it's just stunning. It's like, he works stuff out to the nth degree, and plug for his book there. But it's really like it's really beautiful, and it really is like a piece of art when he does it.
Mm. It's a, I mean, if you want to do McDonald's Aces,
Mm-hmm.
which you should want to do because it's super strong,
Yeah.
this is the best one to do.
Mm-hmm.
No doubt. No doubt. And also if you need a piece to do in like a stand-up living room situation,
Mm-hmm.
do this. It's so good.
Yeah.
John's already done all the hard work for you.
Yeah.
Just do what John tells you to do because it's such a good trick, so powerful.
Yeah.
And the tutorial is excellent. I know I've mentioned to you that you should get David on here to talk about the original McDonald guy, his story.
Yeah.
But the tutorial is so much fun. They're maybe two of the best guys I've filmed on camera, like in terms of like their chemistry together,
Mm-hmm.
because they're just great friends, and it's a lot of fun to watch that tutorial. So
Yeah.
you can't go wrong with that one. That's a home run 5-star
Yeah.
product. Like if you're interested in McDonald's Aces, get it.
Check it out. It's absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
But I think that this is one of the rare podcasts where like, we didn't get many listener questions this week. So by the way, if you're listening to this, reach out to me on Instagram, and it's at Erik Tait, at ErikTait, or even send it through Penguin Customer Service. It'll get to me. Like any questions you want to hear, and we've gotten some great questions that have led to some great conversations. But this week is a huge guest that we're gonna let you in on. It's Derren Brown, which is, I mean, it's wild because he doesn't appear on podcasts very often.
No, no, his first time on this one.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's super cool. When did you first become aware of Mr. Brown?
So I was in college, so this would have been like early 2000s, when his TV special was like first going, the early TV specials, and I was living in Toronto. I remember this vividly. I went to the Browser's Den, and someone was like, "Hey, I know you're into mentalism. You should check out these books by Derren Brown." And Pure Effect and Absolute Magic were both on the shelf. They were like $35 at the time. They were, because it was like I somehow these hadn't been scooped up, and so I bought both of these books, and then like later found out how difficult they are to get a hold of, because people who have them like don't sell them. I mean, when they do come up for sale, they're crazy expensive because they've both only been printed twice. And Pure Effect has some just monster tricks in it, which are crazy good.
I I think like, see, we're both from America, so like I'm not hip to whatever that show structure was, like release of like his TV shows. Like I can tell you every Copperfield special that exists, but
Yeah.
terms of Derren Brown, I'm not sure how it all kind of got released. And I think that his stuff was some of the first like early YouTube clips
Yeah.
that like they like sectioned out pieces of his show.
Yeah.
Like the first clip I ever saw was the chess, the Grandmaster thing where he played the eight Grandmasters
Yeah.
in the circle. And I was just floored by it. I mean, and like I didn't know what I was watching, right? I didn't know I
Mhm.
was watching a magic trick
Right.
or so when he explained how he did it, I was like super like obviously blown away at how clever and cool it was that he was
Yeah.
revealing a method, but then sweeps the leg out from underneath you by revealing the number of pieces left on all the boards or something like that.
Yeah.
So I was obviously instantly hooked and like looking for more clips. I remember that like it's weird. It was the first clip I saw, and I think it might still be my favorite clip from back in the day.
Mhm.
I got sucked in by all those things where he would convince people to give them their wallet on the
Yeah.
street and all that stuff.
You know, the first clip that I saw was the one where he like hypnotized the dude while playing the video game and then like kidnapped him and like inserted him into the video game.
Yeah,
And it
see, that
was,
stuff's wild. I mean, I
yeah,
know that's a little later, maybe
yeah.
not too much later, but I
It's
know that's like somewhere in the middle.
it's definitely
But
like a finale to one of the like series, like the Derren Brown series that he did.
sure, right. Well, I mean, and then I don't know, it kind of fell off my radar for a bit, but
Mhm.
I did get to see him live. Well,
Yeah.
so we've had a couple experiences with him here at Penguin
Hmm.
that I can talk about, which are fun. I mean, obviously we filmed a lecture with him
Yeah.
in
But that's you filmed that lecture with him, which was like, how nervous were you hitting
yeah.
record on the camera for that?
That was just a wild like a wild early Penguin adventure. I don't know when that
Yeah.
it was like 2015
Yeah.
maybe. Flew to London. It wasn't the only one we were filming. We were
Mhm.
filming Darren. We also filmed that trip Andy Nyman
Yeah.
and uh that was not the Tamers trip. It was Andy
Did
Nyman.
you guys do Dynamo that trip too?
Yes. Okay. So it
Yeah.
was it was Andy, Darren, uh, Burglass,
Mm.
Dynamo, and Wayne Dobson, I believe.
Wow. Yeah, that's a
And
lineup of killers.
yeah, and yes, like we just went through a lot to get out there. Like in terms, we'd never done it before, like a mobile filming rig. Not that our
Yeah.
setup was difficult to do, but we're in some basement in some old church. I believe it was called the Crypt, to be honest. And yes, when you get everything set up and all the people show up and then you're ready to go and you're like I just remember it's like, oh wow, I'm putting so much trust into this one red button on the back of this camera right now. Uh, like, yes, I'm gonna push it, and yes, I know it's gonna work, but Jesus, we came a long way to get here to push this button. Um, got to have a quick meeting with Darren
Hmm.
beforehand at his house there in London, which was
Hmm.
wild just to hang out and see some of the cool memorabilia. He took me down to the basement where he keeps the Svengali doll there, the animatronic. He keeps it locked up in like a
Yeah.
glass case so it can't get out. Anyway, uh, so yeah, did you see his show? I can't remember.
No, I never got to see the show. And so I've seen the specials, you know, because he like he'll tour the show, and then when it's like done, he like films it and puts it
Yeah,
out, which is
but you didn't go when he was here in the States.
no, I didn't get a chance to go see him in the States, but it was like I will never forget the first time I saw one of the specials. It was the one where he like makes the audience forget that they saw the show,
Yeah,
and like what struck me was how different he was in print and in the like the show versus the performance, right? Like it was he's incredibly versatile. And so
mm,
seeing that for the first time was like, oh, this is what magic should look like. Like this is what mentalism should look like.
yeah. I watch those stage shows a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Still, I think I
Yeah.
watched something Wicked Comes This Way like recently.
Yeah, there was.
Um,
I watched recently.
if you haven't seen these things,
Infamous.
by the way, go. They're on YouTube. You can watch like
What
it's like watching a full stage show in its
they're like
entirety. It's
on
incredible.
they're on Amazon Prime too. Like you can watch. So I watched Infamous. I watched it with somebody else recently. Actually, funny story. The my I was dating someone at the time, and this was during the pandemic. I was super excited. You remember Derren Brown? The Push came out on Netflix, and I
Yeah.
was so stoked. And I was like, yeah, because he hadn't put anything out in a while, and it was in the middle of the pandemic. And then we watched it, and he tells you early on in The Push that like he's gonna try and convince people to murder someone or push them off a building or something like that. Like he tells you straight up what he's gonna do, and it was this person's first experience with Derren Brown, and we get to the end of
Oh,
it.
geez.
And then she was like, "Why do you like this guy?" And I was like, "No, let's watch the stage show. Let's watch." So then I put on Something Wicked This Way Comes, and they were like, "Oh, this is why you like them." So just be careful how you introduce Derren to someone. Like, make sure that The Push and the Russian Roulette special are not your first introduction. The first time you're showing someone Derren Brown. Watch Wicked This Way Comes or any of the stage shows.
Well,
You
I'll
saw
tell
it
you.
though.
Yeah, I did see him. I went and saw it when he was in New York City. I think it was called Miracle. I
Yeah.
think the name of the show.
Yeah.
Well, with my buddy Stu, we were like, we can't not let Derren come to the States and not go see it. And some funny stuff happened during this show.
Yeah.
I decided that I was going to not be a magician and just like enjoy the show like
Yeah.
any normal human being.
Mhm.
You know, and I didn't know exactly what that meant anymore. Unfortunately, we're all these scarred humans of formerly human magicians.
Yeah.
So I you know, it was dumb. So first of all, just side note before we left, it was like close to my birthday. I remember this, and the guy that cuts my hair is, he it was my birthday, and he was like, once he found that out, he's like, oh, we're putting color in your hair. I was like, you're not putting color in my hair. He's like, no, we're gonna do it. He's like, I'm paying for it. Don't worry about it. And I still don't want it, but like. If you've ever met this guy, which none of you ever will,
Yeah.
he's very convincing. Anyway, so he put this dumb purple streak in my hair,
Yeah.
um, which also made me break out. But anyway, that's a different story. So we drove to New York. We go to the Derren Brown show. I've got a dumb purple streak in my hair. I think I'm pretty well dressed.
Mm-hmm.
Fire alarms going off in my building. Maybe that's a sign I shouldn't tell this story. um, yeah, all good. So when you show up, right, to the Derren Brown show, there's I was approached by somebody that works there. Everybody got these, you know, because he's doing the Q&A thing at the end of his show. The second half of the show is like a Q&A thing. So this just has this little piece of paper where it has you write down, geez, what did it have you write down? Your name or something else, and something that you like a story or something that you did that you weren't supposed to do or something. I can't remember what it asked specifically, but I remember that I wrote down, and this is true. I'm not saying that because I'm proud of it, but you know, one thing that I wrote down, and I should have known. I should have known, like being a performer myself, but like I said, I was just kind of being a normal human being. I wrote down that I once stole a car while living in Prague. So I wrote that down on the piece of paper. Should have known full well that that would be a high interest piece of paper, but you know, what was I supposed to know? As far as I know, nobody was going to look at it, you know.
Yeah.
So I sit down and then we watch the show. There's a trick that he does. Maybe some people are aware of it. It's a trick that uses like photographs of the audience as they come into the theater. So like as you come into the theater, they take Polaroids of you, and then like they make a deck of cards of all the pictures. And if you get, I can't remember if you got something got thrown into the audience. I think that's what happened, and it actually landed in my lap. Or they like randomly pulled out a photo of me and called me up on stage. Can't remember, but yes, I got called up on stage with like a dozen other people.
Yeah.
And I was highly memorable because I had a purple streak in my hair. So the whole routine like plays out. I can't remember the exact trick, but people are getting thinned out on stage,
Yeah.
like whether or not he's revealing something about them or what, like, hey, and was your thing this? Okay, go take a seat. So like there's less and less people on stage until it's just me and Derren. And like he's on one side of the stage, I'm on the other side of the stage, and I'm thinking of something, and I'm like, Jesus, Derren Brown's about to read my mind, and God damn it, I'm a soulless magician and don't know how to act. You know, like I don't know how to. What am I supposed to do? Please don't. Please.
Yeah.
I was terrified he was going to try to hypnotize me or something,
Yeah.
and I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. I mean, I did have trust in the fact that obviously Derren knows what to do, and
Yeah.
obviously he's been in that situation before. But I was also like, does he know who I am? I know I've met him a few times before, but I
Yeah.
couldn't quite tell if like like I think he did.
Yeah.
Like I was trying to pick up on that. I'm pretty sure that he did know who I was,
Yeah.
but I don't know because maybe he was like, well, last time I met this guy, he didn't have a stupid purple streak in his hair. Um, anyway, so that trick happens, and it was like it all worked out fine. I
Yeah.
think he didn't hypnotize me, or didn't try to. So I think
Yeah.
that was my biggest fear. I think I just needed to say yes, that's correct,
Yeah.
and freak out or whatever. All right, so then
Yeah.
the show keeps going, and it was at the end of the show,
Hmm.
the Q&A portion of the show, where he's got his head wrapped in medical tape on the stage or something, and he's revealing the audience's thoughts,
Hmm.
calling on people, telling them what they're thinking, and giving them fortune readings, and I don't know if he was doing faith healing and all that
Hmm.
stuff, but yeah, lo and behold, he calls on me, and whenever he calls on people,
Hmm.
it's there's a camera in the audience,
Hmm.
comes up and puts your face on the screen behind him. So there I am,
Yeah.
the same guy from earlier in the show with the purple streak in his hair. So it's very instantly memorable, which I believe came up even though he was blindfolded.
Yeah.
He referred to that as well as this guy with the purple in his hair. Yeah, okay, right. And yeah, he closed the show with my question of
Wow.
did you used to Derren knew that I used to live abroad. Yes. Oh, and you did something terrible abroad. Yeah, yes, I did. You don't often admit to this, do you? No, no,
Yeah.
I definitely don't. And yes, he successfully somehow knew without having to watch this podcast
Yeah.
that
Once stole a car in Prague.
yeah, once stole a car in Prague.
I can
Yeah.
already see, asking for listener questions that people are going to be like, you need to go back and find out how Nick stole a car in Prague, which we'll
I
save.
gave it back, but
uh,
it's
it's
kind of like the watch steal.
it's it's really wild watching his shows. Like, I know he doesn't talk method ever with people, and we're not going to talk methods on here
No.
about him because that's not cool. But it's really fascinating watching him explore like existing plots. Like, even something as simple as like playing Witch Hand is really fascinating to watch him do.
Oh, it's such a performance. It's so good.
Yeah, and you like. I don't want to emulate him, but I do like watching his shows because there's so much to learn from him, and like it's so very clearly like the show is written and he's got directors, and it just makes you want to be a better performer when you watch him. Like, I don't want to emulate him or like do his stuff or do his personality or anything like that, but it definitely, he's so casual but precise on stage, which is fascinating to watch.
I think he's got some of the most reps out there.
Yeah.
Not by sheer quantity, but like the amount of like big stage show reps
Hmm.
that he has in what I would consider more of like a pure magic setting, like it's not overly produced or anything.
Yeah.
And when you read his thoughts on the subject, which I know you're going to talk about his book, but like you
Yeah.
can tell he's somebody that's completely like driven and committed to like advancing
Yeah.
all the time. Um, so you know, and the we I know we've talked about it before, but the fact that having consistent tries, like
Mhm.
the ability to try again the next night, is such a big deal. And for him to be able to do it at the level he's doing it at, he's
Mhm.
just achieving things that you can't learn.
Yeah.
Other people like only he can figure it out at this point because he's the only person at that level doing it like that. Um, and we're just lucky that he decides to share those thoughts.
Yeah,
Book.
it's really interesting. So Derren and I are going to discuss. We'll flip it over there in just a few moments, but we're going to discuss his book, uh, which is Notes from a Fellow Traveler, which is available with the Neat Review. There's going to be a link in the show description so that you can go there and check it out because I think he just put it into its second printing, which is exciting. And it's well worth the read. And it's one of those if you want to advance your own magic, like these are the kinds of things that you can't really get those insights anywhere else.
No.
Yeah, and there's so few performers that are at his caliber. Like there's few performers that are of his caliber, but even fewer who actually share their thoughts. And so
Yeah.
it's really cool that he's doing that because you just don't.
It's so yeah, he's also touring, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not so even if there's somebody with a comparable show, it's usually in the same venue. It's
Yeah.
this talks in the book about just the different types of people depending on the area of
Yeah.
England that he's in, and it's very cool.
Like it's not to take anything away from David Copperfield, but like
no,
doing a touring show is different than having your own theater because having your own theater gives you the ability to do things you just can't do when you like wander into a theater on the West End that like you're just suddenly confronted with different variables that you can't predict. And
the new book took me like 6 months to read because
Yeah.
I had to keep stopping and restarting because I was just like taking too many notes. So
it's on my coffee table, and it's nice because you can sort of like read through it because as Derren and I will talk, it's like it's definitely written in this like journal format where he's like, it took him it took him a tour to write it, and it's like it's a great
like
you can pick it up and open it anywhere and learn something cool.
It's loosely in the COVID era as well, so it's got some unique challenges. It's not heavy on that by any means, but it is an interesting time to have been trying to restart up a theater show.
Yeah.
So there's so much good information in there. I mean, he's the only person that I think can speak to some of this stuff. It's just very cool.
Well, if this is your first introduction to Derren Brown, you're in for a treat. And go check out, just go look up his stuff on YouTube, on Netflix, on Amazon Prime. It's just, man.
And there's a Penguin lecture as well.
Yeah, and a Penguin lecture, which we'll put a link in the description to that as well. And you know what? I know I got a lot of work that I'm supposed to do today, but I think after we hop off here, I'm going to go watch some Derren Brown. All right, Nick, thank you very much. Everyone else, on to the main event. Thanks, as always, to Nick for joining me on the show. On to the main event. This man needs almost no introduction to anyone who has even a passing interest in magic, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Derren Brown is a performer based in the UK who came to prominence on the BBC with a series of shows featuring unbelievable mentalism, both performed on the streets with regular people and with famous celebrities. The effects featured were unlike anything the public or the magic community had ever seen before. His books are international bestsellers, and copies rarely come up for sale on the aftermarket. He has since gone on to tour a number of stage shows to critical acclaim and has become one of the best-known magic performers in the UK. Derren has been on my wish list to be on the podcast for years, and I was so fortunate that he graciously agreed to be on the show. He's rarely on podcasts. This is a very, very special appearance for us. I was lucky enough to spend some time with him on Zoom, and now you get to join our conversation. Derren Brown, thank you so much for joining me here on the Penguin Magic Podcast. I'm very excited because this is one of the rare times someone has reached out to me and you wanted to come on and talk about your book. And so I assume that we're going to be talking about Pure Effect today. That's the book we're going to be talking about?
Thank you. And please, thank you for starting the interview by making me sound desperate.
Is it Is it?
As
Is that not? Or we're talking about absolute magic? Is that what we're talking about?
so that was the correct book.
We're not.
Yeah.
We're not talking about tricks of the mind.
Oh, that's very good. You're going to keep going. Have you got them all?
Or are we just going to give your opinions on drawing room deceptions and other ideas about Guy Hollingsworth?
Very similar.
No,
Hollingworth.
no. Actually, I think I've been trying to reach out as well because I want to talk to you about Notes from a Traveler, because this has become a coffee table book for me, and it's because I
Very impractical as a coffee table, I'm sure. It's thick, it's big, but it's not that big.
I completely disagree with you because there's so many wonderful. It's written almost like a journal about putting on a show, correct?
Yeah, well, I always write during the days when I tour. That's part of the rhythm of it. And it was a particularly long tour, Sherman. I toured for like a year and a few months, I think, including the West End. So I needed something to do during the day. So it was a joy to. It's why it's such a long book, because it was a very long tour. So yeah, so it's in a journal format, which seemed to make most sense. And it's really a book about, well, it's a book about, first of all, 20, 30 years of performing. There aren't many books, I guess there's enough books about magic theory and stuff around. Not many of those necessarily correlating to the amount of experience that the person's had writing it. So I knew at least I had that. But also I wanted to write about the stuff that I don't even see much in the magic theory books. Partly how to, the writing of a show, that side of it, but also the real sort of lived experience of doing a show, and particularly a tour, and then a whole world of stuff that to me is 90% of what makes magic work or fail, which is things like spectator handling and just the sort of the issues of emotions that you create, and questions of how much vulnerability you present, and what the tricks mean, and just those things that are not mechanical questions, and they're not really the traditional magic theory questions, or sometimes they get touched on, but never in ways that I've found interesting. I felt like my experience of doing the shows for the last 20 years had sort of wasn't reflected in anything I was reading. So I just thought it would be a great time to just put it all in a book, and it was a great companion project to have while I was touring.
I think that some of the writing stuff is fascinating, and I do want to come back to that, especially because I know you're one of the very few performers I know that works very closely with a team of collaborators on a regular basis. Because most of the magicians that I talk to are sort of, out there on their own in the wind. They may work with other magicians, but it's very much a solo endeavor. But the audience handling stuff is really fascinating. Just so last night I have a tendency to pick this book up because after I read the first 50 or 60 pages, I loved the journalistic format. And so you get these really wonderful vignettes of what it's like on tour with you, and then that causes you to have a thought. And just there's this whole really interesting passage about spectator management and like the slow spectator, and how we may feel this urge to keep the show moving, but you don't know what it is until the last moment. And it's just struck me as you must have had these moments where you'd done something that you were mortified over, and it profoundly changed the way that you handled the spectator in future moments.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a very common thing, particularly if you're dealing with quite large theatres. Sometimes it takes people a long time to get out of their row, and there is this natural response I think you have as a performer, and particularly as a magician, when you're creating very often this aura that you are superhuman, which I think is exactly what we need to get over. Most of the book is about how you can perform magic in a more human way, but one of the many downsides of being superhuman as a performer, aside from its total lack of drama or human interest, is that when something does go a bit wrong, you're left foundering, so if somebody's taking too long to come up on stage, or they get a bit stuck on the way, you can start to go into all sorts of panicky, making fun of the spectator, and then of course that person walks up and they're on crutches or there's some other reason why they, can't move properly, it's horrible. And then you've sort of lost the entire audience. So one of and that's partly a very practical thing, is to have those backup stories or something you can go into in that situation that feels like an ad lib, but it's prepared enough that it's not at the spectator's expense, and that if you do throw in a sort of a good-natured joke that you then need to get out of later, that it's okay. But and I've seen I remember seeing the late Pat Page, who was you may know, as a phenomenal Scottish magician.
Oh yeah.
Do a little show in London above a pub, and there were some members of the deaf community in the front of the seating. It was only a small show, but he said, but it wasn't obvious that they were deaf. But he said, "Can I get you to pick a card? I won't make fun of you. Nature's or God's done that already for me." And it was a really like, why would you say that? And then I saw him do the same show elsewhere, and he just had exactly the same line to just anybody in the front. And it's one of those awkward, like, oh yeah, you got to be, because you might say that.
Yeah.
Somebody that everyone else realizes is deaf because that someone's been signing for them or whatever. And it really struck me as just one of those, you have to be very careful. It's very easy to start going into, to sort of defend this slightly kind of nervous relationship you have with your own status as a magician, where if things just start to go a little bit wrong. So I'm now super careful until I know I'm totally in the clear and the person is able-bodied and they were just being slow and chatting to their friends before I make fun. And even then, you can make fun in a way that's devastating and hilarious, but sarcastic or something, that's fine.
The theme of humanity tends to come up in the book over and over again. There's a particularly interesting note about a woman who received a tremendous amount of anxiety from an effect you did where people were sort of forced to forget stuff. Yeah. And then how did you sort of handle not just that interaction, but going forward and creating other material like that? Because her, for the people who haven't read the book, and I hate to spoil things, but sure, her proposition was that there is not consent to take somebody's memory ahead of time, especially in a large group setting like that. And for some people that can be jarring.
Totally. And this happened a lot. So this is in the last show I did, Showman, and there was a card trick in it whereby I'll briefly explain the plot of the trick because it's fairly benign. But it was a good trick, actually. It ended it didn't really end the show, but it was like a big part of the second half. And so somebody comes up on stage and they sit down with me at a table, and there's a brief moment of a sort of hypnotic induction where my mic is quickly turned off and we don't hear what I say. And then they kind of open their eyes and I carry on as if nothing's happened. And I get them to pick a card. And I got a wooden box, which I place on the table. They put their hand over the card and I say, I'm going to count to 5. And by the time I reach 5, that card will have disappeared from under your hand and reappeared in the box. And then I count 1, 2, and all the lights go out. And there's a sort of quite a long pause while I count 3 and 4. And then the lights come back up and sure enough, the card's gone and it's in the box, but it kind of reads as a gag because there was this just long blackout. But nonetheless, he doesn't know how it got in there. So I say, well, you did it. You put it in there yourself. And of course, he doesn't believe me. And I say, no, you did. When you came up and sat down, I hypnotized you. You won't remember this, but you went to sleep for a bit. And I told you that when I count from 1 to 5, that you will put the card in the box, close the lid, and then forget that you've done it. He doesn't believe it. So I say, well, let's do it again. So the second time we do it, and so this time I'll leave the lights up. So I put the box on the floor. So now there's a distance between the guy and the box. And I start counting and I get 1, 2, and then the lights stay up. But he gets up off the chair, walks around, puts the card in the box, closes the lid, sits back down again, but refuses to believe that he's done it. to the extent that I can play him footage because we filmed it of him doing it, and he still doesn't sort of believe it, but it's kind of a weird moment for him. And then the final phase of it is I do the same thing on the audience. So I get someone to come up and guard the box. It's hanging from a rope over the stage. The guy this time signs the card, so he knows it's definitely going to be the same card. He's got his hand over it on the table and the card, and I count from 1 to 5. But this time I go 1, 2, and there's a weird sort of glitch on stage, and then suddenly I'm at 5. There's been like a very, very brief blackout or something with the lights, and nothing's moved apart from the chair I was sat on is over the other side of the stage. The box that was hanging is now swinging. The card's gone from under his hand, and sure enough, like the whole audience of, or however, whatever percentage, have now missed him doing it as well. And I tell the audience this will work on you, or some of you, this time. So they all have that experience of missing the moment. And the guy goes over and opens the box, and his signed card is in there. And then at the end of the show, I play the footage that they all missed in that final round. So we see him. We see me taking the chair, walking across, him going across with me, climbing up on the chair, putting the card in, and coming down again. And it was a great trick, but it never struck us that it would become massively traumatic for a substantial chunk of people. I mean, it was fun, like in the sense that, if you didn't really buy it the first time, now I didn't miss it. He hasn't made me forget that. Then seeing the footage would make the floor fall out a bit from underneath at the end. So I thought that it was impactful, but clearly for some people, if they've suffered types of trauma, that means they've suppressed memories, or just the very idea that somebody can get in their head and make them forget something like that, can feel very violating and very triggering. And I got one angry letter about it at the start and didn't think too much of it. I was like, okay, all right, well, this person was upset. Okay. And then a couple of people actually just upset after the show that I had to go and see, and then another letter, and gradually I realized, okay, this is actually a thing. So then it's, how do you change something like that without undoing the effect? So the answer is normally to introduce some kind of not a disclaimer, but a kind of don't do this if, like a warning. So I would ask to leave the theater and go and stand outside for this bit of the trick if they suffered, or if they're affected at all by PTSD, or if they were prone to panic attacks. I would get up and go out, and I'd sort of be aware within a couple of thousand people watching that this would happen, and I'd say, the ushers will bring you back in, and yeah, so that, and then it didn't really happen again, apart from when people ignored the warnings. But yeah, that's just became an interesting question as to how do you deal with what at first feels like a sort of just a rogue case of oversensitivity, to actually kind of know something you have to take seriously, and then how do you address that without compromising the effect? But I found with this show more than any other, I was having to deal with people that were either really upset by that, or earlier in the show there was some sort of hypnotic thing. I was getting the audience to forget their names and so on, and it was, whether it's a mixture of the fragility of a younger generation and COVID and who knows, but it was a really a regular occurrence that people would have issues.
Do you find that experience has affected the way you and your team start to approach coming up with new material now?
We always try to, like with this show, let's have nothing that's going to cause that kind of upset, which we thought we did with this show. We'd have never thought it would be the card trick at the end that would cause, literally sobbing, shaking, fainting. It's in a way great. We'd all love more of that, but not really when you're having to sit and be very present with somebody for like an hour after the show, making sure that they're okay. So yeah, it's so hard to predict. All you can do is have enough experience to deal with it responsibly in the moment, and just learn from your own experience and try not to let it happen.
Sorry to take it to such a deep place so early on in the conversation. It's just that I find that one of the things I love about your specials is how you tend to deal with controversial topics in an incredibly empathetic way. Like and like more. There's a real compassion for the audience that I often don't see with other things. Like I recently watched Infamous, and the mediumship piece that you do, where you are directly telling people impossible things about past loved ones, and then immediately countermanding that with, but I'm not really talking to them, and the sort of leading towards this idea of not letting people trample on your memories. And it's such a, it's more than ethical. It's empathetic in a way that you just don't see that kind of material. And it's a fascinating way to look at and approach a particular portion of our art, mentalism, which is one of the last bastions of, oh, this could be real.
Well, I think I talk about this. Thank you for saying those things. I think I talk about this in notes from a fellow traveler, because it ended up being interesting for a few reasons. First of all, the trick came out of another trick being removed from the show. So we had 52 seats that came out and a big transformation scene of the set that would bring these seats out. But it was for a big card at any number trick that we then took out because we had another card trick and two felt too many. So we took it out, but then we were left with like, what can we do with these 52 seats? And we had to come up with something for that evening. And it just, to me, it looked like a studio audience on stage. And it reminded me of those kind of mediumship, John Edwards and those sort of shows where a medium is talking to an audience. So that seemed like, oh, great, let's do a mediumship routine. And then, so that was interesting, just it coming out of the limitation and panic of just trying to, build a routine around a chunk of set. But where it then, I think, for me became most valuable was, there is this sort of false dichotomy, this false binary thing that mentalists, and I don't know, certainly when I was writing these things, it was a big thing. I don't know if it is nowadays, but I presume it's still in the air of like, what do you say? Do you say you're doing it for real or not? And where do you sort of that? And while those questions are, I suppose important to know where you stand with all that. It's sort of like it's not really an ethical question. It's sort of an artistic question, really, because ultimately, your responsibility is to the show as much as anything else. And what this ended up being was, as you say, I'm sort of giving a reading. I'm saying I'm getting a message now from your aunt. And I'm not really. I'm just saying this to you, but her name is Jan. Is that right? And the guy would be like, yeah, that's right, Auntie Jan. That's right. And she says, she's telling me, and she's not telling me anything because I'm lying to you, but she's telling me you've just moved house and you've got a blue front door on your new house. Is that right? Yes. And, so there was kind of like this back and forth between this is rubbish and yet, very accurate information. And people are kind of like, they'd be crying, but then they'd be laughing. And then, and kind of, it occupied a really interesting theatrical space in terms of the belief question, which was much more interesting than just, am I doing this for real or am I not? Or what am I saying my skills are? It was a purely theatrical place that, the audience are in this sort of like, I don't know how to take it. And the people on stage also are experiencing this conflict. And the third thing for me that made it really interesting was really early on, I think it was in the first week of that show, I went out and there was a girl at stage door and a bright girl, this wasn't anybody being stupid, who said, I wanted to ask if you could put me in touch with my grandmother who's passed away. And I said, oh God, I'm so sorry. I really hope it's clear from the show that I can't really do that. And she said, oh, no, I know you can't really do it, but I just wondered if you could put me in touch with her anyway. It was such an interesting thing, such an interesting, that we can juggle a kind of one emotional belief and one intellectual belief, even if they completely, contradict each other. So that was kind of, it ended up being a very, I don't know, probably my favorite bit of the show, which ironically had come out of an afternoon's panic of trying to build something around some chairs.
I want to get back to the writing. I mean, I think the first quarter of the book is sort of about how to build a show. And
Yeah.
you have a very close collaborative team that you work with.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but um, Derren Brown, the person we see on stage, is very much that's not you. That's a collaboration among people. That is, I mean, to call it a character is not quite the right way to put it, but am I understanding that correctly? Maybe I've read into things too much or misheard things from other people putting things out there. But it's very much it's a collaboration and not an individual that's on stage. Am I correct on that?
I think it's become my sort of performing persona,
Mm-hmm.
and I think like anyone in that situation, it's me, but it's a theatrically tweaked version of me, as because you naturally hone yourself to be I'm funnier and more interesting and charming than I probably am in real life, but that's the nature of doing a show, and working on it. And yes, in terms of the material and everything, of course, is the three of us. We all write the show together, and the other two direct it, Andrew O'Connor and Andy Nyman.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, there's been a few variations with that, but that's generally our sort of core group. And I think, I mean, to me, it's all about the three of us. So, and we all lose track anyway of who had what idea, and we all think a little differently and similarly in other ways. But it's very helpful and stops you from being indulgent. And me, I mean, I of all people are least qualified to know what's really working in the show, because I'm not watching it. I can't see I'm facing the wrong way. I've no idea. I can guess. I've got the audience reactions to go on, and I kind of got my kind of gut feelings. But it does take another pair of eyes to go. No, it's kind of like, you may love that, but it's one slow routine followed by another slow routine, or you're
Mm-hmm.
standing in front of the thing and we can't see it, or that moment was when you were panicking because actually something had gone wrong. Actually, that was great. So let's try and keep something like that in. And these are all things that you just can't judge yourself. But yeah, but in terms of the character, I think probably at the beginning, it was very much sort of, but also I was younger. We don't know who
Mm-hmm.
we are when we're 20 or 30, but a lot of that probably was forged by discussions as to what would go in or out of this guy. I was doing mentalism, but I was also doing magic, and I was doing hypnosis, and I was doing all sorts of things, and we had to make decisions about, no, let's narrow the focus here. But as time has gone on, it's just sort of just become me,
Mm-hmm.
but a heightened version of me, because you wouldn't want to see all the other stuff.
The exploration of failure with a trick is pretty fascinating. I think it's something you did on Jimmy Fallon, but a slightly different version on Jimmy Fallon. But in the show, it was a Guess Who type thing.
Yeah, Guess Whom?
Guess Who?
That's
Yes.
right. So yeah, there was a version of this, happened on Broadway actually, but it was a routine I'd done for a while, and it was, the Guess Who, is it? It's known in the States, isn't it? It must be a popular game there.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The game that give faces and
Yeah, and you flip them down as is he bald? No, click, 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 click.
exactly. So I would people are photographed as they come in to see the show, and we're using audience faces on a table, and I would have four people up on stage. They'd each pick one of the faces. They would mix them up, spread them around, and they'd have their hands on my shoulder, and I'd be asking them questions. Is this person, are they bald? Do they look vegan? Do they look sexually aggressive? These sorts of questions. And then they would only answer in their heads, not out loud. And I'd be getting a yes or no sense, and I'd narrow it down. I do it with four people, so there's four kind of climaxes. And the nature of the trick is that if I messed up at the beginning, if I was a bit sloppy at the start, which is exactly what happens if you do a trick again and again and again, sometimes you get a bit too relaxed with it,
Yeah.
then the whole thing's not going to work. And I'll have just four failures. So this happened the first time, and I put this in the book because it was so valuable. So the first time it happened, I'm panicking, thinking, how can I justify going back to the start of this trick and having them select four new faces. But I just, there was no reason for it. And I'm trying to think this out in real time as I'm doing the trick. And in the end, I just have to fail 4 times. But what happened after that was there was just like a gag in the script, like a minute later. And the audience laughed at the gag as they normally would, which meant to me, oh, they're fine, right? They're all on track. They're not sitting there thinking they want their money back because I've just failed and what was quite a long routine. So they didn't mind. Okay. And then I'm thinking, oh, I suppose, the night we saw it, he messed up. This thing didn't work. It's potentially kind of fun or exciting, maybe. So, and then it happened again the next night. I made the same mistake. But then this time I wasn't panicking as much because I knew that they'd be all right at the end of it. So I kind of wasn't exactly enjoying it, but I was sort of narrating my fear of it a bit more and saying, I think I've messed up. I think I'm just going to get all these wrong now. I can't really go back and start again. I'll keep going, but if you don't hate me if this is all wrong. And then I got them wrong. Didn't really matter. The audience kind of enjoyed it. And then I carried on. And then it happened a third night. It was 3 nights in a row. And I just had zero stress about it by the night. Now, it never happened again because obviously I sorted out the sloppiness issue. But what it did, it was like, for all of us, no matter how, much we want to charm or seduce our audiences, it made me realize there's this little potential bit of hostility there. Because when things go bad, if you mess up, you suddenly feel they're all against you. It suddenly feels like a load of eyes that are just seeing through you and sitting there thinking this guy's a fraud and you sweating. And it's like, and it's amazing what little needs to happen for that to turn. The audience have no idea anything's different or anything's gone wrong, but you suddenly have that horrible feeling. And with that then gone, because I'd had this experience, and it was like that last little bit of hostility or steam had sort of gone out of it. And it freed me up to sort of then have this thought of, okay, well, if I'm not going to go out with this, haha, I'm fooling you bit of hostility thing, what else could that be? And it sounds really sappy, but I thought, okay, what if my thought was, I'm just going to love the audience? That's where this is going to come from. I'm just going to love them, as opposed to all these other things. And I since found out it was a mantra of Thurston. I think he would stand in the saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, quietly, not out loud, or thinking it, not into the microphone. He wouldn't have had, it was too early, he wouldn't have had a microphone, it doesn't matter. So I just went out with that thought, and then it was really interesting. It just, it may not drastically change the show, but it just places you mentally somewhere a bit different. And then it means that suddenly the things that you're saying, the things you want to communicate, you really want to communicate because if you care about these people, you care about them understanding what it is you want to say. And there's stuff in the show that I want to say that isn't just about the tricks. So it really changed that experience. And I think made a difference to the audience too, but certainly made a difference to me. So it ended up being very, very valuable in terms of that.
On behalf of us mortals, thank you for sharing a failure in the book, because it makes us feel.
The whole book's about failures, really. I mean, that's the only way. It's all. That's why it's 30 years of mistakes. It's all about failures, and you learn your way out of them from the audience. Yes, I've got these 2 co-directors, but they're not there every night, of course, once I'm touring. So you learn from the audience, or you learn from just like the card trick which we were talking about. I did that so many times, and it was a long tour that I kind of went past the sloppiness thing into just forgetting to do any method whatsoever. And I remember it happened maybe 3 or 4 times. And I remember the first time I had quite a lot of cough medicine because I had a cold, and this may have played a part. But I'm just watching the trick play out like I'm an audience member. I've sort of like done some weird detachment thing. And I'm getting to the end of it, and I'm realizing, no, that card's still going to be there under his hand. None of this will happen because I haven't done any of them. But why haven't I done the method? So, I mean, stupid, weird, surreal things like that really only come from doing the show too many times.
Do you think maybe part of in that first time the Guess Who trick didn't work, you incorporate a lot of caveats. What I do is, it's not real. It's a lot of observation, sleight of hand, influence, things like that. You're very clear that you have no powers and that you have skills, which is it's sort of an unusual tact for most people when they perform in our art, because they may not overtly say that they don't have powers, but you are very overt in it. And sort of you coming to the audience with this very honest, I have no powers, what you're seeing is a demonstration of skill, is sort of gives you like it. Does it take some of that like adversarial nature out of it with the audience? And so when you do have a screw up, it gets back to that feeling human thing, and they're feeling like you're one of them, like they could be the ones up there messing up.
Yes, I hope so, because I would want that. But B, I sort of while that's sort of in the air, I just don't. I've really tried not to make the shows about what my skills are or aren't. A big thing in the book I talk about is making the show about the audience.
Yes.
And it's something that my manager said to me once. He said, "You're very unusual in the world of magic because you're the only magician that makes the show about the audience." And I'd never thought of it like that. And I thought, oh, that's a very nice thing to say. And then, but where it was useful was that it then became a conscious thing of like, right, okay, shows about the audience. And that's sometimes it's very helpful. Somebody says something that may or may not be true, but it becomes a helpful and inspiring thought for future work. So, and then that means that brings with it then not just about, well, I'll get the audience to think of something, or I don't know. It becomes then about, well, there's a couple of thousand people in a room with me. Like, what's important, and what's worth making the show about? If it's like, what do you want people going away thinking? And that doesn't have to be, and shouldn't be, I don't think, it's not very interesting if that's only about what his skills are, because then it's about you again. It's about the performer again. But it might be about themselves. Maybe are they supposed to go away a little changed? Are they supposed to go away thinking about each other or the world or themselves a bit differently? And to me, that's just more interesting, because you'd want that from any other sort of thing that you're going to gather in a room in a theater and watch. You'd want to come away feeling a little bit changed by it, and then if you can balance that right, so you're not preaching at people, and if you're not, you've got to. The trick is for people to make connections themselves, which is another big thing I write about. Is that you for that stuff to work and to actually hit people in the right way, they need to be doing it. You need to be just planting things in just the right way that they kind of join the dots and all the things that are necessary for you to feel something for real, and not feel you just having ideas thrown at you, or being preached at. So that's all the stuff really that to me is much more interesting. And I kind of find you can say whatever disclaimers about what your skills are or aren't, and they're not, A, it's not that interesting, and B, people are going to make up their own minds anyway. And it's a bit, you can say I don't have any skills in this area, and then if you just keep demonstrating skills in that same area, people are going to presume you have the skills in that area, and your disclaimer at the start is pointless. So I just think it's a not very interesting question to be at the heart of a show. So I've sort of given up making it a central feature.
I think one of the interesting things in the book too is because it takes this journalistic journalism approach, as your journaling throughout you wrote this during Showman, I think you mentioned. We see the show change in real time, and that must be frightfully difficult to do, because your shows strike me as so intricate, and when you're touring, I mean, you're moving pretty quick as you're doing this. So how are you finding that time to not only change, but also dump the old stuff out of your head so that it doesn't come up in the show in real time?
Well, the first couple of weeks is big changes. And actually, the Showman was unusual in that it was written, we wrote it pre-COVID. And it was sort of about two things. It was about how the things in life that when life goes bad or it feels difficult, how that can feel very isolating and lonely. But actually, that feeling of isolation that we get during those difficult times is exactly what everyone else is experiencing. And it's the one thing that connects us, actually, bizarrely, with other people, because it's just such a part of the human experience that we're drawn to these sort of lonely, difficult times. We all are in some way or the other. It was about that. And it was about my dad, who was ill, and about the sort of advice that he was sort of giving as he was reaching the end of his life. And there were two things that were in the air at the time for me, and I found interesting, and I thought would be a good heart for the show. Then COVID came, and two things happened that exacerbated those themes. One, Dad died, and secondly, we all lived through this very literal play out of the very things that isolate us are the things we all share in. So we tweaked the show to reflect that, particularly around my dad. And we'd already committed to what the ending was, but it now had to become something. Well, the meaning of it changed a bit because of my father dying. But and then the other theme we could sort of lean into a little heavily, but we knew we didn't want to come back after COVID talking about COVID. But I could talk about these things, and I knew that people would relate it to their own experience over the last couple of years. Plus, they would have lost people themselves through to COVID. So it ended up having a real heart, but it also meant that we'd had so much time to think about it and drop out ideas that we felt out of, from in reflection weren't really great the first time around. That by the time we came to mount the show and get it up on stage, it was in really good condition. But normally, the first week or so, maybe a couple of weeks, you'd be changing a lot. Every night, big changes, as you would probably with a lot of plays. If you have scope to be rewriting the play from night to night. So show gets rewritten. It's all a bit of a headache for me and for everybody backstage. But there's this lovely point after, a week or two when it's set, and then you can the show can start to sort of fly. But even then you've got the fun of just changing night to night, but then it's little changes. It's every night there's something. Oh, that was great. Let's keep that in. That's not working. Find just a better way of doing something. The joy of Andy and Andrew coming to see the show and being fooled by something that I've changed and purposely haven't told them I'm going to change. And, that's lovely. And that really that's what keeps the show exciting. I mean, Andy and I sat on the last night of, I think it was Enigma. We sat in my dressing room, never going to do the show again. And we're still discussing changes that we could implement just because it was so much fun to do that. There were a couple of big changes we had. So the tours normally happen in two legs. So there's the first one of a few months, and then maybe the West End happens, and then there's another leg of the tour the second year. And really early on, I got a phone call from Vinny DePonto. Do you know Vinny? He's a New York mentalist, brilliant.
The name is familiar, but I don't know why I know it.
Well, he's a dear friend, and he called me up, understandably confused and upset because the opening of the show was the opening of his show.
I just read this passage.
You just read this passage?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we were both really good because he had sat with over dinner with me in New York a couple of years before, during the pre-COVID, when I was doing Broadway, and had talked to me about the opening of his show. And I'd sort of it had so happened that the core idea was something I'd had a conversation about years before with somebody else. So in my mind, it had sort of come from that. But of course, I mean, it hadn't really. It had come from having sat down and having had a whole dinner with Vinny. So this idea had ended up forming the opening of my show. And I totally blanked that it come from Vinny. So then what we had to do, obviously, was take it out and rewrite the start of the show. But actually, that was very, very difficult because there were some aspects of it that were not related to Vinny's idea that had to be kept in order for the rest of the show to work. And it was how you would preserve those things and also still have an opening of the show that was as strong as what we had been doing. So that was a huge and probably the most difficult change I've had to make we have had to make to a show, because that's like a big ball of threads in a jar. trying to pull out, you know, one color. That was kind of difficult. But yeah, ultimately had to be done, and was really kind of awful thing that I'd done without realizing.
Well, it's just, it sort of gets back to the empathy and that you perform with, which is, there's a lot of people who would have said, I'm sorry, can I give you money? And that was not exactly, you said, no, artistically, I'm not being true to myself, and I'm not being true to my friend if I don't fix this.
Yeah, well, my first thought was, I can't imagine we're going to change it. I don't know. I couldn't even get, because I couldn't even get my head around that he told me. I had no memory of the dinner or anything. So
Yeah.
my initial response was more of a sort of, I don't know. But then moment's reflection after putting the phone down. So of course you have to change it. And Andy and Andrew as well, totally exactly the same. Everyone's first instinct was, well, of course we can't do this. But then like months and months and months of trying to work out what it could be. But you know, also in the same breath, one of the reasons why we just don't do anyone else's material in the show is sort of, well, it's not as much fun, first of all. It just sort of just isn't. But anything that even feels close to it, and it's not about technically whether this person owns it or not. It's not, I mean, that's important, but to me, it's sort of artistically, like there's so much that you can do. You're in a room with a couple of thousand people, or 500 people, or it's 12 people above a pub, whatever your situation is. You're just in a room with these people that are locked there, and there's a real electricity in the air before you come out. I think particularly with magic, mentalism, and like, what do you do with that? There's so much you can do. You don't need to be skirting around someone else's material and the question, do they own it? I mean, the moment you're asking yourself those sorts of questions, well, what can I change to make this not like theirs and my own? You're too close. You need to have a cold shower and start again. It's so yeah, we've always tried just to steer clear of anyone's things.
As your profile has risen over the years, the shows have changed a little bit, and there's a fascinating passage in the book where you reflect on the opening monologue from Infamous, and where you talk about how, in order for the audience to connect with that monologue, they have to really know who you are and have this grounded history with you, which is artistically a huge swing, even for someone of your stature. How has your relationship with, you know, sort of becoming very well known changed the way you approach the shows?
The key to that, actually, the point I was really making was about earning, particularly for mentalists. You have to earn the right to step back and say, just talk, or, you know, for those things not to just feel indulgent. You have to first have proved yourself to then be able to step back. And it's, I think, a common mistake in mentalism is that the performer is so sort of, thinks they carry such a sort of aura of, you know, that they're terribly interesting, and that they carry all that already, that they sort of have permission to just pontificate and just talk and take forever to get to an effect. And you don't have that. And all the shows up to Infamous started with a game. I would come out very much on the front foot. A lot of this is Andy's input, because he's like a prize fighter when he performs, and he's right on the balls of his feet. And then we got to Infamous and was like, okay, let's do something different here. And maybe by now we have earned it. So it was earning it across those shows rather than within a particular show earning those moments. And I think it's helped a lot. Although interestingly, we kept that. That was the opening of the Broadway show as well. And we were all very aware that I wouldn't be known out there. Although, as it turned out, there was a big fan base that came to see those shows. So, I mean, they kind of did. And actually, it was all fine. That didn't feel indulgent. But what helped was the fact the audience had no idea. They either were fans, so they were into that way of starting a show, or they thought they were coming to see a play, or they didn't really know what the show was going to be. So somebody coming out and sitting down and just talking was fine. So what I found, I suppose, is I've always been very loose about what my kind of brand, for want of a better word, is. You know, I had the other year, I remember I think in the same month, I had a book out about um, ancient Greek philosophy, essentially, book out on happiness, and a ghost train open at a theme park. And I just remember thinking, this is kind of, I like the fact that, whatever people decide I do can encompass both of these things. Like, this is a really fun place to be. Um, and I've never said I'm a mentalist or I'm this or that,
Mhm.
because I mean, I have in passing when these things have been discussed, but generally I've avoided any of that, because you suddenly become, well, he does that. And if he does that, why is he doing this? And why should we pay any attention to this?
Mhm.
Um, and well, that's not strictly mentalism, so that you shouldn't be doing, all those kind of things, which I think probably at the start, I remember when I used to read the Magic Cafe many years ago to see what people were saying about me when I first started. There's a lot of that. That's not mentalism. You shouldn't be doing it. Whereas actually over the years, I think that's kind of, I think that's served me. So likewise with the shows, I although they're always going to be at their heart, magic shows, because that's the fun of it. That's ultimately what people are coming to see.
Mhm.
Um, I kind of just feel like I've, over the years, with the type of work that I've done, which is quite varied, sort of had this permission to do lots of different things, which is very helpful when you've got to come up with your, 12th show.
Mhm.
It's easy then not, or easier not to just keep repeating yourself. So yeah, it has helped by me keeping it purposefully vague. Also, I find that people are more responsive to things like suggestion,
Mhm.
because they're there in this anticipatory
Yeah.
mood. Half the work is done psychologically, which I'm sure is different from before. Um, Again, though, I mean, we didn't have anything hypnotic in the American show, because I
Mhm.
was just worried that I was going to get sued because you have such a litigious reputation. Um, but I was kind of, well, I guess audiences probably in the States they're more kind of demonstrative and open anyway.
Mhm.
So I was surprised. It seemed to make up for the fact I wasn't as known.
Mhm.
What they brought to it was more anyway. So it sort of balanced out. But yeah, certainly in terms of British audiences over the years, it really helps.
Mhm.
The familiarity they have with me is just like a language that's there
Mhm.
before I've started. I don't have to explain myself as much. I don't have to
Mhm.
demonstrate what I do and how I do it and why. Because I said those questions aren't that interesting to me. Whereas I did have to do that in secret on Broadway.
Well, I know that we're about out of time. We've got a few minutes left, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this, because I'm not always in a position to talk to somebody, not just of your stature, but who is producing interesting, artistic, and incredibly relevant material. But I'm wondering what it is in the current magic and mentalism community that you're seeing that's exciting you these days.
Oh God, I'd love to have a generous answer to that question. I don't. I feel very out of tune with it.
Really?
Yeah, I haven't read any magic books for years.
Hmm.
Although I'm very much looking forward to Ted Karmilovich's book. I think there is a book in the pipeline somewhere,
Hmm.
uh, which hasn't been made yet, but I was asked to write a blurb for it
Hmm.
time ago. So that excites me.
Hmm.
But I find particularly with mentalism, everything sort of, has moved towards electronics, which I mean, they're fun, but they're
Hmm.
not of any practical use to someone that's a touring performer, uh, because of reliability, but also you want to you want to take responsibility for your own miracles, and you want to be able to uh, move fluidly when things go wrong, and not just be at the mercy of those things. So I've sort of, because of that, lost interest in what I just sort of
Hmm.
found myself drifting away from it. And also in real life, I don't really do it much in real life. I occasionally do corporate shows, but that's its own thing. And I obviously tour. I never do close-up stuff or show people things in real life. I never play up to that side of my professional life in
Hmm.
real life. So I've sort of had no reason to um keep attached to it. And what sometimes happens is that somebody shows me something that is so exciting
Hmm.
and really delights me, and I kind of go, oh, it's that. That's the thing that it's about. And like, so 99% of the time, someone shows me a card trick, there's no interest. It's all about them. It's all about I am just some, warm prop in the trick, and I sort of, smile and say nice things, but it's just I sort of have no interest in it. And then occasionally, like there's a guy called Bradley Hodgins who was on our tour backstage last year, and they were all like really good magicians. And he showed me this card trick that, and he was just demonstrating a point really, and he didn't very often do tricks, so it was always kind of a treat when he did. And he did this really simple trick with so much charm. It was so engaging, and I squealed when it was done. And I kind of, like, on reflection, like, it didn't take much explanation from him for me to go, of course I know how that's done. But it sort of, it was just sort of wonderful in the moment. And whereas any number of other, great are doing amazing stuff that's technically phenomenal or really complex, certainly fooling, but you just really don't care. So occasionally when those moments happen, that kind of excites me. They're sort of few and far between, but I think, and I don't know how to describe that in terms of a thing. It's just I'll always be excited by that feeling, and it's so rare, isn't it? But you just can't deny it when it's there. It's just it's the best.
It sounds to me, and I think this is maybe because I've been steeping myself in notes from a fellow traveler, that at the end of the day, what excites you is not new methods, new tricks, new concepts, but it's new ways for people to come together and interact. And whenever you see something new, in people, that's what excites you.
That's nice. I hope so. And also, I think that I genuinely think that all the interesting stuff, I love the tricks where you've got a framework. So in Showman, there was a psychometry routine I did where there's the basic framework of I've got these objects and I've got to return them to people. But the interesting part of the trick we decided was going to be the readings that I would get from the objects and the things that I would be able to tell people about themselves and the objects. And actually whose was the least interesting part. And that bit was almost thrown away. And sometimes I'd even get it wrong and it didn't matter. But the interesting stuff was the human aspect of it. That's always to me what it comes down to. And to the point that the tricky stuff, the method stuff, it really isn't. It isn't interesting how clever your marked cards are. That's kind of interesting to you as a performer for like a minute when you buy it. And, it is an odd thing that what we perform as magicians, we can do anything. And what we perform is dictated by magic shops. It's dictated by what the latest releases are. That's a really odd thing. The interesting stuff and the stuff that makes the trick magic is what gets called subtleties. It isn't subtleties. It's like 90% of the impact and the stuff you should be thinking about. And the 10% is the just enough that you need to do mechanically for this thing to work. Everything else is where the fun is, where the joy of it comes from for me. And that is both for yourself as a performer and keeping it fun and keeping it interesting, and also for, more importantly, I suppose, for the people that are taking part in it and your audiences. And it's just like that's where it all is. And I think these are not subtleties. This isn't just little stuff. This is the key of it, and why I wrote the book, because I don't think there's enough of that stuff.
Well, it's in its second or third printing with the neat
we
review.
just started the second printing. I'm selling it on my website for the moment, just privately. The first one just sold out pretty much overnight, and then we were slightly behind in terms of keeping up with the demand for it. So we've got a bit more of an infrastructure in place this time. So yeah, it's just done the second release of this book, which is on derrenbrown.co.uk.
Well, I'm loving it. It's a beautiful book. It's full of amazing insights and really fascinating stories, and just like, I don't know. This is a book that I wish I'd read 10 years ago.
No, thank you. And there are some tricks in there. That's the other thing. I did put some tricks in because I didn't want it to be one of those, are there any tricks? And then no, it's just about theory. It's not about theory. It's very practical stuff.
Yeah.
And there are in their
Well,
country.
I know we need to wrap up, but I think that is an important thing. Is it's not about theory. It is, this happened. This is how it affected me. This is how I changed things. And it's like it's a literal roadmap.
Yeah, it's I hope a very practical guide to performance and improving these not so often spoken about but massively important parts of magic that actually make it magic and impactful.
Well, there is a link in the description, in the show description below, for anyone who wants to go pick up notes from a fellow traveler. Derren Brown, thanks so much for joining us here on the Penguin Magic Podcast. I hope we can have you back again very soon.
I'd love that. Thank you, Erik. That was a joy. Thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for this week, kids. Thanks so much to Derren Brown for being on the show, and thanks to you for listening. A link to both the Derren Brown lecture on Penguin and Notes from a Fellow Traveler are in the show description. Be sure to pick up a copy of both. I know you're going to love them. Couple of announcements before we go. The Penguin team is going to be at Magic Live. We have some exciting new tricks we're going to be debuting, including a stage illusion, new Craig Petty releases, and my brand new effect, Gasp, which Nick and I will be talking about next week. As always, we're a weekly podcast, so be sure to like and subscribe, as well as share your favorite episodes on the social media platform that you've been watching for news about the NHRL on ESPN2 on. If you want to reach out to me about anything on this week's show, you'll have to come to my house as a local cable provider and install cable TV so I can watch my robot fights on ESPN2. Y'all, this is huge. Lower weight class robot fights on a major sports network? I could pinch myself. But if exciting news in the robot combat world isn't your cup of tea, you can always reach out to me on Instagram at Erik Tate. That's at ERIKTAIT. From me and everyone else here at the P3 Magic Studios, practice, practice, perform.